Start that way. Good evening. I now call the Rocklin Unified School District Board of Education study session for Wednesday, January 27th, 2021 to order. Brenda, will you please call the roll?
Julie Hupp.
Here.
Rick Miller.
Here.
Rochelle Price.
Here.
Tiffany Sathoff.
Here.
Derek Counter.
Here. I want to remind the public watching that this meeting is being held pursuant to the procedures established in Executive Order N-2920 issued by the California Governor Gavin Newsom on March 17, 2020 in response to COVID-19. The public may view this meeting through RUSD's YouTube channel live stream and provide public comment through the links on the RUSD website as well as the board agenda under item 2.1. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Tonight, our study session presentation and board discussion will be on the RUSD budget for 2021 through 2024, so three-year budget. We welcome Superintendent Stock to start the presentation.
Thank you, President Counter and trustees. Want to thank you again for taking time to really dive deeply into our budget as we prepare to bring recommendations to the board for its consideration. As we know, annually this time of year, this is when we get the governor's proposed budget, and then we begin to formulate recommendations around our budget, which is required to be a three-year budget. So we also know that the board's been engaged in unprecedented levels of input from our community, and so really what we're planning to do tonight for the board is really just kind of help frame that conversation a little bit around some of the fiscal realities, and then also share some kind of overview highlights from the earlier in this month LCAP survey that went out to all parents and all staff members. And then, of course, as you all know, you've been out at our parent-teacher clubs several times over the last week and a half, and then there's a little bit more tomorrow to go to engage directly with our families that way. And so really our goal is to create that context for you then to really process a lot of the input you've received, because we know you've not had a chance to talk to each other since you've been out at all the different schools. And so trustees, I'm going to then turn it over to Barbara Patterson, to Deputy Superintendent, to provide a quick budget context, and then Hannah Anderson, our Director of Innovation School Programs and Accountability, will provide some overview context on the LCAP's budget survey pieces.
Good evening. Excuse me, President Counter, Board of Trustees, Superintendent Brown. Did I do that?
Here's the old school.
I did not do that.
How did you do that?
Okay, can I crawl under the table now? Good evening, President Counter, Board of Trustees, and Superintendent Stock. Can't see my red face here. Okay. This is the budget reporting cycle, and you are familiar with this. This is our required reporting cycle, and we just received the governor's budget proposal, and the next required report is the second interim, which will be brought to you in March. The budget, as you know, is built on many assumptions, and enrollment is one of the most significant. This slide shows you the impact of the decline in enrollment that we saw this year of 763 students. We have a hold harmless funding. The blue bar shows you the actual ADA, and the red bar shows the funded ADA, and we have a hold harmless provision, so we'll be funded at the 1920 ADA level through 2021-22, but starting in 22-23, we will be funded at the lower level, the actual level of our actual ADA. So for every 100 students that we are below our 1920 level, our funding will be decreased by about $550,000. So as you see in the two out years, the two bars are the same. We're funded at our lower enrollment level. And then this graph shows you that we need to have an increase in revenues each year just to keep pace with our increasing mandatory expenditures. The top three are our special education program to cover growth in our students who need special education services, and then the rates for both our PERS and STIRS pension costs are projected to increase in the out years, and then our mandatory salary schedule for people moving up each year for longevity. Most of our employees will receive an increase year over year, and so the projected increase just in these mandatory areas is $8.7 million over the next 3 years. So we've updated the multi-year projection, and again, so many assumptions go into this. This was using the School Services of California projection for the cost of living increases in the out years. There's also the Department of Finance projections for COLAs, and both of those will most likely be changed or be wrong, but they're two different versions of the COLAs. The School Services COLA projections are lower. They're about half of what the Department of Finance is projecting. And so as we move through the budget development process, we will be adjusting those. Again, we'll be adjusting those at the May revise when we get the final COLA for 21-22, but depending on which COLAs you use, it will give you a range of which will impact our deficit spending. But as you can see here, we're not projected to deficit spend until 22-23. This next slide shows this information in kind of a summary form. Again, not projected to deficit spend in 21-22 based on our current assumptions, but you can see significant deficit spending in 22, 23, and 23, 24, again, because of the decrease in enrollment and state funding and the increase in our mandatory costs. So at the bottom of the screen, you can see we have a reserve of 12.59% projected for 21-22, but because of the deficit spending in 23-24, we're below the required 3% minimum reserve. This graph just shows where the cuts have been made since 2018-19, approved by the Board of Trustees. 95.7% of these budget reductions were away from the classroom. Examples of the classroom reductions were the 0.5 work experience teacher and summer school. Examples of the classroom supports were assistant principals, instructional coaches, technology equipment replacement, site budgets. And then examples of the operational district level supports were here at the district office, the deputy superintendent position, the coordinator of state and federal programs, the clerk, and supply budgets and deferred maintenance funding. This just shows that even though we're not showing a structural deficit in the next fiscal year, it's important to make reductions to address the structural deficit in the out budget years. And so this is just a simple example, by cutting $1 million in the first year, you will accumulate savings of $3 million, but if you wait until the third year, you would have to cut $3 million in 1 year, so you'd be cutting deeper into program cost. So our projections are based on the best information that we have at the time, and things will change, and one of the things that we hope change for the better is our enrollment. Enrollment growth will have a significant effect on our state funding beginning in 22-23. And then, as I stated earlier, what the actual COLAs are, not only for this year, but in the future years, will affect our our funding and multi-year projections. What is actually in the adopted state budget could look very different from what the governor rolled out and proposed this month, and the legislature may have their own ideas on how to spend that money. There is additional funding coming to education. We just don't know how it's going to be rolled out, how it's going to be allocated, and what strings are going to be attached. And then federal funding, we are going to receive some additional federal funding, but we've already identified how those dollars will be spent, and you can see up there, it will be spent for sick leave for our employees for COVID-19, PPE, learning loss, and online learning. And then hopefully, President Biden has talked about additional one-time funding to help out education and state and local governments. We don't know what the impact of the pandemic will be on us going forward, and then other budget assumptions such as our liability insurance, our workers' comp rates, all the other items in our budget assumptions, those will start to gel as we get closer to our June adopted budget.
Okay, at this time we're going to talk about the stakeholder engagement that took place earlier in the month of January to engage our families related to budget priorities. We had significant stakeholder engagement in the form of our LCAP survey and also through PTC meetings that you all have been leading this month. With the survey, this survey was open from January 4th to January 10th. It elicited a little over 1,300 parent-guardian responses, which was just about double, or a little over double, the amount of respondents we got on the survey last year. However, less than other surveys. It is a longer survey and elicits a lot of information across all 8 state priorities, and this year we included a budget addendum to give you information for making decisions about our priorities. We also had 275 staff respondents, and that was very similar to the number of staff respondents that we had last year. That was broken down. About 75% of those were certificated staff, and about a quarter of those were classified staff from across the district. Roughly the same amount coming from elementary and secondary in those respondents. There were 3 questions asked, as well as an open-ended response. The first question asked for respondents to prioritize 4 educational areas, and when you looked at the responses, you could see very clearly that respondents were giving roughly $20 to $30, a little bit of money to all 4 areas, right? So there weren't initially pieces of this information that rose to the top. However, if you added together the cumulative amount of money that respondents wanted to allocate to each of these areas, then you did start seeing some differentiation between how both parents and guardians and staff would spend their money, with well-rounded student experience rising to the top in both groups. So just to give a little bit of context for what that means, in that particular question, there were those 4 areas that could be rated, and then there was examples of what that means. And so for well-rounded student experience, they were looking at extracurricular programs, music, arts, athletics, culturally inclusive student programming, and development of civic and personal responsibility. So those were pieces that were just lumped into that well-rounded student experience priority area. The second question actually listed 12 priorities and asked for respondents to rank order those priorities 1 to 12. And so with those, we did also receive very similar responses from our parent guardians and our staff, with both groups rating academic interventions number 1 and smaller class size number 2. And with that, you could see that the majority of respondents did put those 2 in their top priorities, whereas the 3rd, 4th, 5th priorities appeared that there was a lot of respondents who rated those somewhere in the middle, right? And because so many respondents rated those in the middle, it rose those respondents up to 3, 4, 5. But it wasn't necessarily that there was an overwhelming response that the 3rd priority of arts and music was their, in fact, 3rd priority. It was just that so many people rated it in that mid-range. And I can share an example of that being that just over 65% put academic interventions in their top 3 priorities, whereas only 37% put that music and arts in their top 3 priorities. So you know that those respondents are more in that central area. However, you did see top 5 for parents and guardians being academic interventions, followed by smaller class size, then arts and music, then social emotional, mental health supports. Athletic teams and classroom technology were rated very similarly. Okay. And then for staff respondents, same top 2, academic interventions, followed by that smaller class size, then social emotional mental health supports, then arts and music programs, and then classroom technologies. This month, you have held parent-teacher club meetings throughout the district. Those are still ongoing, so I want to be very clear here that the middle school, high school, and student responses on this slide are cumulative responses. However, those actually only represent one school. And as you all know, you've had great participation from those people who have attended the events, but the overall participation rates of these events hasn't been extremely high, and so I want to be cautious in putting this up, just to say that we want to be thoughtful that maybe 8 parents coming or 15 parents coming does not necessarily represent 800 parents, but nonetheless, we have found some cumulative data for you to show at elementary, maintaining current class sizes rising to the top. Music and the arts and instructional aids for classroom support are priorities. And then across the board, you see from middle, high school, and student representation, you see that enrichment or extracurricular. That was called out for students on the survey as clubs or academic competition, right, as examples of those pieces. Specialized programs or middle school academies rose to the top at the middle school, and the third priority was tied amongst multiple other respondents for middle school. For high school, you see music and the arts and athletics rising to the top as well, and then for students, athletics was their number 1, and you also saw behavioral supports, such as substance abuse prevention and alternatives to suspension being important for the students. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Roger for discussion.
Yeah, so trustees, we know that you're actually very familiar. You've seen these survey results in a prior memo. You've been in these parent meetings, and you've seen the budget overview information multiple times in those meetings. So we really developed these 4 questions. I really want to turn it back over to the board and say, there's 4 questions here. The board can, really to help guide your thinking, you can choose to take them in order. You can just kind of have a general conversation, and we're just really, staff and I are here to support you in answering any questions you may have, but really want to turn it back to you to kind of process what you're hearing and what you're thinking and answer questions you may have.
Can I just clarify? I am so sorry. I don't think I caught exactly on slide 14. So when we had each school and then it went to the next slide and we could click on the school and see the results for ours, were you not able to compile the 14 that we've done so far to see? Because it says results show priorities from one school?
Yeah, the middle school,
Okay.
we have not held Springview and Whitney High School's PTC meetings. Those are tomorrow. So we just wanted to indicate.
Okay.
And then the Rocklin High students are tomorrow. So
I
yeah.
got you now. Okay, thank you. I was trying to be sure. I thought he said he was at Whitney yesterday. I was like, wait, what happened? Okay, thank you.
And we can send you revised data after tomorrow evenings and presentations, so you can see if it impacted the changes.
Okay, thank you. Well, I can go first about something that I saw really apparent. Marty and I did 3 elementary schools and 1 high school. And it was very, very apparent in the 3 elementary schools that every parent, I think, had voted for small class size. It was less apparent in the high school parents. Most of them, as we talked about, okay, and I even said afterwards for our discussion part, hey, I see that isn't at the top. It was on the list. It was towards the middle, but it wasn't at the top. And when I said, hey, how do you guys feel about this? Some parents, said, my kid wouldn't notice if there was an extra 1 or 2 in the classroom. What my kid does notice is that we don't have, football games and We're really, really concerned about the emotional behavior and what's that going to look like when we come back to school full-time and even next year as we hopefully are, making progress in the fall. So I thought that was really interesting to see such a big difference between the elementary schools and the high school. Did you guys see that as well? In the elementary schools that you visited, were parents really concerned about class size?
Yes. Class size was high on the list.
My experience was, it was high, but when we talked about it, it went way low. It immediately said yes, but then as you explained, and one parent said, oh, you mean doubling class size, so
Right.
having 60 kids in a class. And then we say, no, that's not what we mean. And again, in this area where we're trading dollars, if you have one or two more kids, here's what you get for it. It very quickly changed to that does make more sense. So
Yeah.
that was in the 2 I was in, that was our experience.
That was actually our experience with the students at the high school. They didn't understand what we meant by class size.
Right.
And when we explained it, they understood it better. They said the same thing. Well, what's one more kid? What's two more kids? Now that's students, not teachers.
Right.
Just
Sure.
to be clear.
Yeah,
And, go ahead.
yeah, real quick, and then I'll look at Bill. I think this came up with Sunset Ranch. They were talking. They said we were comfortable. The PTC said I was comfortable with class size increasing as long as the offset was we could increase some aid help. So there was like, hey, I'm going to
Support.
get a few more people, and then it was like it was funny because you can't take one for the other, but it was just interesting to see. Creative idea.
Yeah, but that's not budget savings, that's just budget movement, right? I would love that too.
And on the similar lines, I saw the same thing. Class size rose right to the top. But as we really started to ask why, the reasons really helped me understand a little bit more. For a lot of the families they were sharing, they felt like it was more of a one-on-one support or an intervention support. They felt if the class size was smaller, but as we talked more, it was really the need for aids or the desire for aids. It was really more that concern of when we say that class size, are we talking 1 to 2 more students? Or are we talking 10 more students? And I think that concern was an aid in the classroom or not. That seemed to be more prevalent in the conversation as opposed to actually class size. But I think the concern was we want everything.
Right.
But if we have to look at what are our priorities, it was really that classroom support they felt actually started to meet the need of a lot of the other areas they were concerned about. They felt if there was an aide in the room, then it could make the ratio of the class feel a little better. It could actually probably help with some of those behavior supports as well. Some of that gap instruction time, pulling aside a student when needed, when a teacher's unable to do so. And so I felt as we started talking more, it was more that classroom support was what was actually being communicated. And if class sizes increased, somehow making sure that we prioritize the classroom supports.
Roger, can you tell me, just for clarification, what the class size maximums are at the different elementary, junior high, high school?
I'm going to actually ask Barbara to respond since she can, off the top of her head, just cite those. However, we do in 9th grade for English and math provide, I think, a 28 to 1.
$32.
Now, in my presentations, I haven't been able to go to a high school yet, so that was interesting to hear the perspective between elementary and high school. I do think that's something good to take note of. That if there were other priorities for high school as opposed to elementary or middle, that entices me to kind of ask a few different questions and ask what does that do to the budget if there's a class size change at high school as opposed to elementary instead of an across-the-board decision. Did anybody have anything when you were meeting with parents in your PTC meetings that after they saw the results, although it may not be reflected in these totals, that then they said, oh, wait, I want to change. I wish I would have said something else was a priority. That happened to me a couple times. Did it happen in your meetings? So I'll give you an example. One of our school sites, the top 3 were class size, classroom support, and social emotional support. But as they started talking, they said, wait, classroom support might actually meet those others, and so we would rather put music and arts up there. Can we change and go back? And it was interesting because several of them said, if I would have known the other person hadn't put that, I would have made that a higher priority. So I thought that's an interesting point to take into consideration while we're talking, because it may not be reflected on here, but I did hear that in multiple PTC meetings I had.
Sounds like you were asking good questions.
Yeah, in the schools that we visited, music and arts was definitely at the very, I mean, it was second under class size in all of them, and it was really consistent. Although I do think, though, that you should share with how your meeting went at Granite Oaks, where once you explained, you know, immediately some parents were like, oh, let's get rid of academies. That doesn't cost us any money, right? And then when you explained it, then that, you know, kind of changes things, which is really good. You know, I know it's question number 3, but that's what was surprising, is to hear some of the perception about how much things really do cost, and that'll help us make decisions.
Yeah, I would say across the board, if you put up, wherever that last slide was, if you put up all the, you don't need to put up the slide, sorry. Every single one of those programs wasn't clear to people what we actually meant. You have no idea what we actually mean. And so you're just guessing. So I think actually a lot of this, of the survey, all of this is just guessing. Because class size, I have no idea what you mean. And so I think if nothing else, it showed a lot. In fairness, though, I think, like, I don't want to go spend thousands of dollars educating the entire citizenry on the intricacies of the Rocklin Unified Budget. They don't need to know, right? So I mean, they're welcome to it, but most people, you know, have jobs. And so it's a tough thing to figure out, to understand, to figure these out in a way, these buckets in a way that people actually understand what they're talking about. But I will say again, what was interesting was in a calm setting, even through Zoom, when you're able to talk it through, it does make people think differently and sort of get through. And the academies was a perfect example. Was people are very strong in academies. You say it came in very, very high. But from their perspective, it was free. So why would and it makes sense. If you're just in academy, you wouldn't know why it was cost. So you wouldn't know that teachers are actually teaching less periods, right? And so there's actually a significant cost to that. Now, I don't know that changes their perception. I think they would still say we still want it. We still think it works. But having those, beginning to have a larger conversation for understanding of where the dollars are. That was the other thing that was asked for us, and we weren't able to do it quickly enough, is it's great that you list it, but I'd actually like to see listed with the dollar behind it, which is say, if I cut this one, do I not have to cut all 5 of these because this is a huge dollar amount? And so understanding that concept, I think, was also a strong, which is perfect. If you're gonna ask me these questions, I'd wanna know that too, right? And so trying to understand that.
You know, Trustee Miller, that's an interesting one, the academies. What was that conversation around that? Do you have, it sounds like they obviously, it's very, very valuable. I know that's a huge dollar amount, looking at it. Did you guys get a chance to get into details on that a little bit of what it could look like if there was a change there, or was it really a top priority?
Well, I mean, I guess we said what no academy would be, that every teacher would be teaching 7 periods a day. But I mean, I think it's very clear. I know that when I was at Granite Oaks, my kids' experience was people loved the academies. I think, if I'm being perfectly blunt, and I don't want to lead in any impression, I'm not sure the data backs up that it's that effective, right? In terms of academic achievement, in terms of where we are, I'm not sure we can absolutely say this is not going to part. We have issues that we need to look at. So that's why I think everything at the middle school is something that should be considered. Having said that, I think more than anything else, to me, what came across is the academies are one thing, and I think we can talk about whether they're academically and impactful in a way we want them to be. But the breaking down of a large comprehensive middle school into small academies, so I have a personal relationship with a teacher and a set of students, that is unquestionably what drives people to want to be part of it. And that is, I think, what we cannot lose if we were ever to think about something different. So figuring out, is there a way to think about that, but whether or not it serves both of those purposes, both academic gains and that is social emotional. And what I heard clinging to was the social emotional part.
Thank you, that's helpful.
A couple other things that were shared at our meeting last night and in our meeting with Sierra Elementary is parents do not want to lose the things that make these schools special and the reason why they came. And so, specifically at Sierra, those parents are really concerned about the IB program. They do not want to lose that. We had a parent last night at Rocklin High School that said, the reason why I moved to Rocklin, the reason why I moved to Rocklin High School is because I want these CTE pathways that are there. And so those reasons why we attract families and why we retain families, I definitely don't think we want to lose. We need to remember those and prioritize them.
I totally agree with that, although, and this is actually, I shouldn't say although, it's not a disagreement at
In
all.
addition.
It's in addition, is that
Yeah.
where it gets hard is, because I heard that, what I heard was consistently putting academic achievement below belonging and below arts and music, because that's why my child goes to school. I heard that consistently. It was important, and it was changed my thinking, and I appreciate that. On the other hand, I think one of the reasons why that may be is because people think we have high academics in
Totally,
Rocklin.
we're doing a
I don't
great
need to
job in
protect
that.
it, we've got it. But if we stop investing in it, we're not going to have it. So the same thing where there was a lot of people that put safety low, and when you're pushing them, the reason they put safety low is because they said, we feel safe.
Right.
But it's because we invest, right? So we have to sort of, put those together, which is that we can't stop investing what's working because it's working.
And along those same lines, I did find it interesting in the 4 schools that we did, not one of our survey results ended up with curriculum. And so we explained, hey, we have legal requirements, that guidelines that we have to, keep our curriculum up to date. But it was interesting, to your point, we're doing fine with that, right? Like what we have is good enough.
And also just, if you don't work in education, it makes so much sense to me to think, why would it makes perfect sense to say that. I wouldn't spend money on that.
Right. But the high school parents, especially last night, seemed really concerned about the whole child, which I really do appreciate, that these kids are independent learners and are doing a lot academically, but they also are really concerned about how they're doing socially and emotionally. So that was, I heard it loud and clear.
Thinking about that, when I was looking at the LCAP, I did have a quick question. Superintendent Stock, maybe you or you can guide me to who might be the best answer on that. When our families, it looks like families and staff prioritized well-rounded student experience, what description were they given for that? Was that a title we gave to a grouping of responses, or was that an option that they chose of 4?
Okay, so on that question, they were actually given 4 different responses that they were prioritizing and they were allocating dollar amounts to, and each one of them had a descriptor that came along with it. So for well-rounded student experience, it said, this priority includes extracurricular programs, music, arts, athletics, culturally inclusive student programming, and development of civic and personal responsibility.
Thank you, that's helpful. I assumed it was a lot of those great extras that makes Rocklin so incredible, but I wanted to make sure. Thank you.
Yes, on that question, they did actually receive additional indicators, and that wasn't true in the second question and the third question, but in that particular one that you see that is the highest response rate, they did get that indicator.
And one more follow-up question on that. When you were describing earlier the money spread through all 4, there weren't very large amounts to any one. It was more when you added them up that we started to see that rise to the top. It wasn't necessarily prevalent. What I'm getting at is they still gave about $20 to $30 to each of those ranges. It wasn't like $60, $80 was spent an overwhelming amount for the well-rounded student experience, correct?
Correct. There were still some respondents who did allocate higher dollar amounts, but typically somewhere between $10 to $40 was spent on everything, with $20 and $30 coming out more highly. And I can pull that up too if you want to see that in more clear detail. But the only priority area that had a I did pull kind of the top $3 amounts spent in each area, okay? And the only area that had $50 spent in those top $3 amounts was that well-rounded student experience. So you could see for some respondents, when you looked at it as all respondents, as well as, I want to say, the middle school, high school, and staff, when you broke it out by them as well, $50 was spent in the top $3 amounts allocated at the middle school, high school, and staff response rate, or surveys.
Thank you, that's helpful. So many times, right, when there's a survey, it's helpful to know exactly what information they had, because it helps us get a little bit more into the results of why they may have chose what they chose. Thank you.
Absolutely. I think that also gives you a good indication to have more respondents. You know, you have 506 high school respondents to that survey, you know, over 200 middle school respondents to that survey, a little over 500 elementary respondents to that survey. So that gives you a broader amount of information when trying to think about priority areas across the district.
Thank you.
Similar comment, we talked about it, just curious if you have it, like the staff priorities, again, well-rounded student experience, I think it's the same thing, academic growth, safe, supportive environment, college career. I guess in those buckets, from a staff priority standpoint, training, development, staff services, PD, et cetera, where does that fall into those top 4, or is that just lower on the list or not included?
Great question. So in the survey, professional development, curriculum, technology, growth and academic achievement, those all fell into that academic growth area. And for staff, that came out as their second response. I'm going to go back to this one. It came out second for them, but you can see when you look at the total dollar amounts spent for staff, there wasn't as clear cut of a delineation. So whereas well-rounded student experience still came as number 1, there was pretty closely followed behind by academic growth and safe and supportive environments, versus there was a wider gap that we saw in other surveys. So for this one, you could easily see that there was 3 that rose to the top for staff, versus for parents and guardians, you had well-rounded student experience followed closely thereafter by academic growth, and then the other 2, college and career readiness and safe and supportive environments, fell further down the list.
And more maybe Superintendent Stock, for continuous improvement, it would be nice, and again, probably talking next year's LCAP or the year after, when we break down LCAP categories and we ask people to rank them, and then we do a survey with the community and students and et cetera, it's hard to, if we're not using the same terminology, it's going to be difficult to start pairing things together. So maybe next time, if we can use the same breakdowns, or at least, because it's, this is great, now I'm just trying to compare. I asked this question, but I never said it as well-rounded student experience. I said it as A, B, or C. So again, future, but it
No,
would be
and
nice.
that's great feedback, and that was just part of, one was developed in December and then the other in January, but it's a great alignment that allows you to have apples and apples conversations.
I'm just going to share one other thought that I had from one other piece of input from parents. We heard a lot of comments about technology for kids, and that parents felt like they would themselves rather take on the Chromebook expense for $150 than the school district spending tens and tens of thousands of dollars on that. And, you know, I pointed out we have 14% of our kids are on free and reduced lunch, and we do have some that have needs, and it was awesome to hear the parents, I mean, several, I'll buy a Chromebook for Johnny, you know, that needs one, which was awesome, right? So if we said to a school, hey, we've got 30 kids that can't afford a Chromebook, do we have 30 parents that are interested? I mean, absolutely, they were in, which is great that we have a generous community thinking about that. But they felt like that was one that that they as parents could take off our plate, which was good to hear. They really felt like teachers were the ones that needed to have their technology top-notch. So especially in a situation like we're in this year, they are able and have what they need to teach. So.
Going off what Rick said earlier, and it's more curriculum, looking forward, what new curriculums are on the cusp or real close? Is it, and again, I asked both of you guys, I know we talked a little bit about science for elementary, but just what do we got coming on the hopper type thing?
The same thing, science is one, and that's where we're going to be looking at using open resource. That's what some of our neighboring districts at the high school levels have gone to. That potentially could save thousands of dollars. Doing a TK-12 adoption, can run in excess of about 1.4 million, where going to an open resource, you could, a lot of that material is free, and then the cost comes in the new equipment, printing, adjustments that you made to that curriculum, and we could probably do that. Our goal in the science adoption is to be right around 100 to 150,000 for high school.
And that cost is for the material. The other cost when you have a new adoption is there's training, professional learning, because you just don't put out the resource. If you don't invest in the training and helping teachers implement, then it's not worth spending the dollars on the curriculum. So typically when we have a new rollout, we focus more professional learning to help teachers navigate that, and also for our site administrators. So, but just to kind of look at things we have in the budget for curriculum adoptions is we have budgeted some dollars for science, and then we have world language. There's been some budgeted allocations for next year, and then math is budgeted for 23-24. And that was earlier, but last year the board in their reductions moved some adoptions like math and English language arts out a year. And so there are some of these that are budgeted, but, and of course those can be reshuffled as needed. But for example, ELA is scheduled for 24-25, and there's nothing in the budget yet because it's further out than our 3-year budget. And some of these adoptions like science, the last adoption we had was in 2007. So we also want to make sure our teachers have the most current materials to support student learning as well.
And we also have new standards in science, so it's particularly important.
Right. And then the assessments that we're accountable to through the state and other processes is we want to make sure our materials are aligned, because that while teachers do a great job supplementing, we also don't want to ease the burden of we expect them to go do all this research on their own to find materials. We want to work with them and support them.
But just to follow up and then open resource with the science that Marty was talking about, so thank you. Ballpark, let's call it 150 for high school. If we're talking about the training piece, the all-in, what are we looking at for all-in? Is it $1 million? Is it 500,000? Just ballpark.
I would say Bill and I talked about this yesterday, and when you look at that and you look at training, usually 3 to 4 days, we could probably do a district-wide training for about 250.
And the elementary science piece is about, K through 6 inclusive is about $600,000. If we bought the whole package, there's some variance on what we can buy. I like the idea of open source for secondary. I think in elementary it's difficult when you have teachers teaching multiple subjects.
Sorry, the 600 you're talking about, that's all in, or that's just for the materials?
That's for materials, all materials.
Training included?
All modules. No, the training would be, it's about 250 for K-12, so it's about half of that for just elementary would be about 125 to do 3 full days of training. Substitute costs.
In the current year budget, there is $544,000 that was budgeted for science. With the pandemic and everything else going on, it just wasn't the year to engage in some of those pieces. So that is not enough to cover the full elementary and the full secondary. As you heard, the open source could save some. The board did adopt, and we did implement new middle school materials, the Amplify curriculum, if you recall. So And then again, we've budgeted 600,000 for world language next year, and then we don't have another major adoption scheduled to 23-24 where we have $1 million budgeted for math.
Could we jump back to technology for just a minute? I'm in the meetings I've had, it was interesting. I had many parents kind of snicker and laugh and say, our kids are overdone with technology. We don't need technology. But I tried to dig deeper to understand really what that meant. Was it because they're excited for the in-person learning, but there's still additional technology needs in the classroom? So I tried to focus the conversation more on what are our technology needs in the classroom. And obviously, we're only hearing from a subsection. So colleagues, I'd love to hear from you what you heard. But I consistently heard that be a lower priority, not because they don't prioritize it, but many felt, and I did have some teachers on my call as well, that they had supplies they needed that they could probably utilize for the next 3 years. Did you hear anything similar along those lines? And then a follow-up would be, what kind of fiscal impact would we be talking about if we maybe paused some deferred technology replacement?
Right. I'll just real quick, my feedback, and it's similar to Rochelle's, was, hey, we'll cover it. My kid has a computer, my kid has a Chromebook, so I heard that. Even when we went to the high school, kids even brought up, hey, we have cell phones, we have computers, don't see the need for the Chromebook. So it was interesting to hear it, not only from a PTC parents, but even from high school kids. So one high school, but.
I would think to add to that would be the extra money that's come in for the COVID relief that has gone towards technology, current and future technology. And I would think if we could use that money for that and then take the money that we have in the budget out, that could be an area of savings.
Right, and so you noticed you got the attention of our Chief Technology Officer who came in the room. He actually passionately wants to speak to this, but just to give a context for Ryan, is that we have never intended to do one-to-one for students because we knew families could, and there's more robust things we could do, because we do have a link on our website that you can, I've done it twice for my own kids, to click there, it shows up at your house, you just send in your credit card, is that when we do the state testing, we have to have a secured device. So there's for the day-to-day instruction, bring your own, and we've set up the infrastructure to accomplish that. But there are some pieces where we do need that secure. The other part of all this is it's the behind the scenes, like wireless switches and the audio-visual and all those other pieces. And so I just would urge the board to think about our technology pieces the way you would our facilities. You need to have an ongoing plan and budget to take care of those. However, Trustee Hipp, you're exactly right, that with the learning loss from the state and federal dollars, there is a real opportunity to use those to take care of identified needs in the next immediate years. However, at some point, those are one-time dollars, and the board would need to look to re-up the investment in that. So it really just, in a way, defers the expenditure, but we would want to kind of put it on the board of we'll have to at some point return back to it. But Ryan, I know you have some specific information too.
No, I mean, you said it perfectly. With testing, and sorry, I got up and ran in so fast I left my mask on the desk in there. It's nice of being in the conference room by yourself. For testing, of course, like Roger mentioned, we have to use managed devices in order to do that. And really, beyond the infrastructure and the tools that they use, there's kind of this pattern of, as you buy devices, they have a shelf life. So a Chromebook will last 5 or 6 years as you buy them, and then they stop getting updates, so they can't do stuff. You can continue to use them. The ones that went out in 2019, we still have them out there. We checked them out for distance learning. They're working, and they're able to do that. But it's that consistency, being able to, we've got a bunch coming up this summer, more coming up the summer after that. So. That's really as far as technology goes. And then really the infrastructure, like Roger said, the switches, the wireless access points, the things that kind of provide what goes on in the background.
And our teacher laptops, the board did a huge one-time purchase, because a lot of the money from the state the last 8 years has been one-time. So 2015, we did a district-wide purchase of staff laptops. And other than them breaking, we have not done a replacement. So, you know, many of them still work, but every year you go, the likelihood of it not working is an issue. And the district did invest in AV upgrades because a lot of those were just done when we built the school. So we did a whole overhaul there. So, and the board's been very diligent about those types of investments, plus increasing bandwidth and access has occurred. But the wireless switches, frankly, is about a $500,000 issue that we need to really, will have to be attending to sooner than later because they're out of actually warranty. So they work, but their likelihood to fail is sooner than later.
Yeah, and it becomes a security issue for us. You know, K-12 schools are really big targets for hackers and bad actors, so to speak. And like Roger pointed out with our wireless access points, they're a couple years past end of life. So we kind of have to halt and be really careful with our software updates, which kind of leaves us a little bit of vulnerability and just kind of a weak link in the chain. So.
On the, I guess it's the parent, guardian, staff input, I guess slide 13. There's one of the categories is opportunities for credit recovery. What is that?
Summer school, I think.
So that would be summer school, yes.
I'll jump in again. You hit one of my next topics. I'd love to know a little more about summer school, what that looks like for our USD, what the fiscal impact is, the needs of our students that are utilizing that, and I'm thinking specifically the next 3 summers.
Sure. So we're required to provide extended school year for students with disabilities. In addition to that, for a number of years now, we've provided credit recovery for high school students. On average, we have approximately 500 kids. A lot of those are 9th graders, and the 2 subjects are language arts and biology. So we've done a couple things to deal with that. At Whitney High School, we've provided a couple sections to do online credit recovery that is taught during the school year, so kids don't have to go to summer school, because not all kids that need summer school attend. So then those credits that they miss, then it pushes into the next grade, next grade, next grade. So it's always a priority to deal with seniors, and I give credit to both high schools, because obviously we don't want to prevent a kid from graduating because of one class they've missed. So our administrators and our counselors work closely with those families. Families that aren't on target have the option of transferring, or because of our mastery learning, what happens frequently is kids want to stay at the comprehensive site for all the fun activities near the end of school, but if they don't make it, then they are transferred to Victory, where they still are able to graduate through Victory High School. But again, I pulled up some numbers. Last year, being an interesting year because it was online and Miss Cranston was the principal at that time, in 11th grade we had 145 students participate in that, and we had 369 9th and 10th graders, for a total of 514 students participate in summer school. And that's, you know, the average has been around 450 to 500. This year, as you're well aware, the high schools are a little different. So we are not planning on offering a summer school because they're able to do credit recovery. And there's 3 ways in which we looked at that this year. If a student, for whatever reason, did poorly and had extremely low percentage, they were able to be re-enrolled because, again, a brand new school year started in January, because they're only taking 4 core classes, and so they complete a year because they're going every day. So from August to December, they did a year's worth of material. So all high schoolers received a completely new schedule for the second semester. So there's a new set. So kids that may have failed something that's a graduation requirement, they were allowed to be re-enrolled. In lieu of having an elective, they may be back in a language arts class again or a biology class again. So that's going to take care of a handful of students. We also do have some online options that we're working by the use of Edgenuity that we're using at RVC. We have some sections at both high schools that will be using that. But the number one thing that we really pushed is teachers, instead of giving up their power of learning, to continue to work with those kids. So a number of kids were able to complete, are still in the process of completing that. By ed code, a teacher is allowed to change a grade at any time, and they're the only one that can change a grade. So if they're close, maybe just missing one or maybe two essential skills, teachers work with those students to really get them over the hump so they earn a passing grade for that class. So as it stands right now, we are not planning on offering a summer school this year for our high school kids, with the hope that they will finish up. And again, we will work with 12th graders. Obviously, we don't want to prevent them from graduating. And then any 9th through 11th grader that doesn't pass a class will have an opportunity next year. Just one additional thing in summer school is we did away with middle school summer school years ago. However, 2 or 3 years ago, we started a Jump Start program for students that really had struggles in middle school with math. Because math, as most people know nationally, is a challenging course. And so we have 2 years of data. Dr. Kathy Pond started that program, and Greg Giamana from Granite Oaks did that for 2 years and did a great job. And I believe we did a board communication last year on the success of that program. I'd be happy to go back and look at that. But again, I do believe that it was successful to get those middle school kids ready for high school math.
And then we will continue to offer extended school year per student's IEP. So students with a disability, if it's in their IEP of needing additional extended school year time, we will continue to offer that. But that won't be the large credit recovery. When we traditionally think of summer school, we think of that for the credit recovery piece. And we do offer some we have offered in the past some night school opportunities as well.
Correct. That's a mid-year.
Without having summer school this summer, has that fiscal impact already been taken into account, or is that just a moving of money to cover the Edgenuity cost?
Talking to a mic that's not on.
Thank you.
Just taking a look again at transportation, I know you guys have had some successes moving things around, making adjustments. Is there anything in the future 3 years that's outstanding for transportation other than, kind of deferred maintenance and upkeep on equipment? Like, we don't have any planned major purchases for transportation in the next 3 years, do we?
No, we don't. That was one of the items we did have a plan in our budget to replace a bus every other year, but our director of transportation applied for some grants, and we'll be bringing that forward to the board for approval to get a couple buses replaced through grants.
I love grants. Awesome, fantastic. Yes,
But
thank you.
the other thing is in the board, I know we've shared this before, but is that we have an encroachment of nearly, is it $1 million, Barbara, on transportation. So the board invests out of its general fund dollars, $1 million to cover the cost of transportation beyond what the state pays us. And a lot of that is, of course, we have, if a student has transportation in their IEP, we provide that for our special education students. And then based on the board policy, there's certain walk zones, like if the Sierra Elementary students that go to Whitney or Springview receive transportation. And then there's the fee they pay. This year, we've had very few bus riders, under 200, and so the fees that would support transportation have not been coming in. So we've actually been, that's hitting us in a negative way, because the cost of fuel and the driver, which are our biggest expenses, we pay if there's 5 kids on the bus or 60. So we are this year experiencing a downturn in the revenue for transportation and also nutrition services. When we are fortunate to provide a free nutrition to all students under 18. However, if it's free, then nobody needs to purchase a meal, and the reimbursement rate doesn't cover the full cost. So we have the same labor costs, the same quality of food cost, but we're receiving a significantly less revenue, and so those are going to be pieces, if they continue, will have negative impacts to where we have not had to ever ask the board to contribute to the cafeteria fund from the general fund. But if that doesn't reset when we all go back, then that could be another drain on the general fund.
And when you say reset, do you mean if we have to continue providing free meals going forward, or if, what do you mean by that?
Meaning a couple of things. One, if we go back 5 days as the board voted in April and we serve lunch, we may have some students wish to purchase, even though they don't have to, but really it's after this year. When we go back to full-time school, we hope that the purchase of paid meals goes back to where it was. If it doesn't for any reason, then that would be problematic. Because they started this year with a $500,000 reserve?
It was 800.
800,000, sorry. And they have eaten through all of it, but
All but less than 100,000. So it's had a big impact on,
So our 3-year budget, we've taken into consideration that we would be receiving that income again next year and the following year, is that correct?
so, right, so in our multi-year, our assumption is that next August, we'll be back to the normal, back to school, students buying lunches, back to 4,000 meals a day instead of 1,000 meals a day, back to normal is what we've done. So if that doesn't come to pass, then we'll have to make an adjustment because we won't have that reserve to absorb that loss.
And that reserve also helps fund equipment and things. So the nutrition services, when they need new points of sale or a new, oven or something, that fund services that program. So it really is a self-sustaining program of the district, so if that were to stay for a long time, there could be other needs versus just the immediate like labor and food costs. And then that's really a good, well-run program is self-funding and not draining on the general fund.
But that's not so for transportation.
Barbara, I'll let you
Well,
recite the
I
state
would say
funding.
that it's complicated because the funding for transportation from the state, the model has been broken. It hasn't been updated since the late 80s. And so what Rocklin Unified is funded at their level, the size of the district at that time versus the size of the district now, it has not been, the formula has not been updated. So if you look across the state, some districts have no encroachment because their funding level was set at a certain level back then. And so it's been broken. People have brought it up year after year, but the legislature has not chosen to address it. And when we switched from the revenue limit funding model to the local control funding model, they froze the amount, so they cut the amount by 20%, and then they froze it. It's like an add-on to your local control funding formula. They froze it, and so that has not even received a COLA since 2013, 14. So it's a broken system, and so it just keeps encroaching at a higher level each year. And so hopefully someday the legislature will address that.
Getting into the, just real quick financial, I guess model's the right way to do it. You had enrollment, COLA, state funding, federal funding, one-time, like those are all assumptions. Don't need to show me the model, but are there, I'm assuming there's some that weight higher than the others, and there's some that have a higher probability than others, right? Can you just, like, if we, obviously a jump in enrollment has a higher, potential than maybe federal funding, like.
Right, so all we've heard so far is one-time stimulus money from the federal government. So obviously that would help, but ongoing funding is what balances your budget. And we really haven't heard any estimates of what the new president's program would be, just that they're looking at a second stimulus, like a Part B to what they passed in December.
So the probability of that is 50/50 at best? I mean, it's a coin flip?
Right, if they can get 50 plus 1.
I think it's probably a pretty decent chance of something, but to Barbara's point, of one-time funding, so it doesn't help us.
Gotcha.
I mean, it helps us, but it doesn't.
And,
go ahead.
the funding is wildly different. It's based on, the federal funding is allocated on Title I rates. So it's based on a kind of an equity model of students in poverty need more funding. So we receive, like, say, 2.1 million out of this second round of ESSER money. But a district like, say, nearby San Juan or someone may receive $45 million. So so when you hear about these giant amounts coming in, then you have to look at the lens of which they're allocated under, which is based on Title I allocation. So I'm not saying that students in poverty shouldn't have more funding. I agree they should. But when you have to look at the context of how that flows into a district like Rocklin, those numbers aren't as great. But Barbara's biggest point is they're one-time dollars that just allow you to kind of move a structural deficit one more year out versus actually remedy it.
Okay. And then the COLA, that's, I've seen a couple different models. We have something for 2020, I guess this year, next year, but not something for the third year, or help me out?
No, both of the projections, the school services projection and the Department of Finance, they're projecting that we receive COLAs in all the way through 23, 24. They're just projecting different rates. And so the projection for 21, 22, the 3.84%, that was a combination of what we didn't get this year plus the actual statutory.
So you're filling in a gap
COLA.
on the backside, so
Yeah.
that it's not
So you
all
lost the
three.
money this year, but they're bringing that
You'll never
up.
make it up.
Yes, but the
And-
1.5% that they're projecting for next year won't be finalized until April.
Okay.
And so when you go forward, school services is projecting more along that line of the 1.5 approximately for all 3 years, whereas the Department of Finance is projecting 3% for those out years. So that's the difference.
And
between-
again, the conservative estimate is the 1.5, and
Yes.
that's essentially ongoing, but ongoing until third year,
And
that we can
then,
see so far.
right, and that's in line with the Legislative Analysis Office came out,
November.
and the school services lower number is more in line with that legislative analysis number.
Yeah.
And then the other piece is, if you remember the slide Barbara put up around, COLAs are wonderful, but our just annual cost of mandated expenses, we need a certain percentage just to maintain pace, and that's it's a near 2% number that we need just to cover the growth in special ed pensions and our obligations on the maintenance of the salary schedule, which is those more experience, you receive additional compensation. So a COLA of less than 2% means that we have to find money somewhere else or additional revenue somewhere else.
Gotcha, so we need 2% just to keep everything going, assuming everything is flat, you need 2% just to keep everything going every year.
Approximately.
Gotcha, approximately.
For years. For years, I've been trying.
So back to transportation, you said there's $1 million encroachment per year. How much is that over the budget that is in transportation?
So the revenue that we receive from the state is about $223,000. And so I'm trying to remember the numbers off the top of my head. And so are you asking what the total cost of the program is, or?
Yes.
I'm trying to remember, I think it was about 1.4 million. And we did go back and look and say, okay, what if we only offered transportation for the special education, it's in the IP, And what our department has done our transportation department has done a good job of is providing least restrictive environment for our students and integrating special ed and gen ed on their buses. So basically, if we did that, we would have an increase in our encroachment because our paying general ed students are helping cover that same bus cost. Like Roger said, or Superintendent Stock said, if there's 5 students on a bus or there's 30 students on the bus, we still have the same direct labor cost and fuel and repairs and such. So we did try to look at that to see if that was an area that we could reduce, and we didn't really see any savings if we pulled back the services.
Okay, so you've already done an analysis on the number of buses that would be needed if you only did that, okay.
And we just raised fees last year.
Correct.
So we did that, too.
You guys did everything right.
What's the yearly bus pass?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the
What's the
question.
yearly bus pass? It was like
I want to say it's 350.
But if you've ever sat in the traffic at some of our schools in that 20-minute window, you might pay that $350. And there are some, I mean, the reasons why, again, districts do transportation often is, there's a, you look at safety, like, we don't want kids walking across Highway 80 to get to Springview or to Whitney. So there are ways to look at those zones. In some ways, just what's a reasonable area to walk or not. And then there is, we wondered what would the correlation be on attendance without transportation? Is there a hit? Is there not? You don't know, but you can make a lot of suppositions. I don't think we know if anybody heard a request for more transportation now. I mean, we don't transport a lot of the students overall, so it was interesting that it was kind of a non-issue. And let me ask the other question too. Was there anything you didn't hear that you were surprised? Because sometimes we talk about what we do hear, but was there anything you didn't see or didn't hear that you surprised you, that you thought, oh, I thought I'd hear about that?
I did only hear once that we should cut the district office staff. I was surprised I didn't hear that more.
I only heard once, I heard there, what I already mentioned about the curriculum, that wasn't brought up, but I really enjoyed these meetings because it's a really good opportunity also just to understand some general perceptions. The example of the academies are free. There was a couple parents calling the PM, those were the kids that got the dirty desks. Like, there were some really good things to hear, that what the perceptions are in our community, so that we can do our part to be sure that we're communicating accurate information. So I really felt like it was valuable, the conversation. And I went into all the breakout rooms, I assume you guys did as well, just to be listening ears to hear some of those perceptions and concerns.
Something that wasn't one of the priorities, but I did hear quite a bit, which was a good point, was a lot of our parents want us to remain competitive. And I asked, what does that mean? It wasn't really a priority. It really wasn't one of the options on the survey. But as they talked more, I started to understand, that which makes Rocklin special, they don't want to lose. Mm-hmm. That which makes their kids excited to wake up in the morning and participate, they don't want to lose. But even furthermore, it actually initiated conversation of students that have not yet returned to Rocklin or new families coming to Rocklin. What do we need to keep to make sure we remain competitive? And I felt that was an interesting conversation, that it wasn't necessarily a bullet item on a priority list, but I actually really valued that as they started talking more, and I really was writing down and asking questions, what do you mean by that? And that's where the music and arts came up, athletics came up. the relationship with their teacher. The parents loved that. They said, I love that my student right now has such a phenomenal relationship with their teacher. They have a relationship with the aides, those that had those. And so I felt like that was a good point, that you may not see that show up on this, but it was really good for me to sit back and listen to and hear that that's a good point. Relationships are important. These activities are important. And so I wish I could have sat in on a middle school one, because I wonder if that was the same. And that's where I asked these questions about academies, because I feel like that would fall in line with that. However, it ranked a little low on both the staff and parents. And so that's why I was wondering why that ranked so low. And it might just have been, there were so many priorities across the board that you have to choose some. But I found that to be an interesting point as we make decisions. The academic growth, I'm a huge proponent of, okay, our academic growth, but it made me take a second and sit back and listen to our parents and some of the teachers on the call.
The only one that I guess came up and we talked about it, there was some questions around RVC, and I think it's just rumors and things around. I know that hopefully we've dispelled those and that the RVC program will continue to be on, but it was, heard it from one school, didn't hear it from the other school, and then when we talked to the high school kids, never even came up. So maybe it'll come up with the Whitney parents. I don't know yet, but interesting.
And I, just to, RVC has shared a clarification message with their families that there will be an online option next year, and that we're gathering input from stakeholders and to look at what that option will be. We're bringing it to the board for input, and then we'll be putting out an offering. So we have affirmed to our families that have chosen that option that there will be an option, and we know that, like everyone, that we improve every year what we do. So we have worked, and Ms. Anderson can address that.
I just want to clarify that there will be a clarifying message coming. I don't want anyone to feel like they didn't get the memo. There will be a clarifying message coming with that opportunity to provide input. So there is a work group being put together right now. We'll be soliciting volunteers for that work group in an email tomorrow out to all staff in the district, because we also know that some of our staff who weren't in RVC this year may have experience in this area, and we want to hear from them. But the parents, and we will also be tapping a few parents and guardians to be part of that team so that we have that perspective right there, as well as surveying a recent survey. We've surveyed them a number of times this year, but Ms. Hanks, the administrator overseeing RVC, will be surveying as well as sending that clarifying message early next week to make sure that all parents in RVC can provide their input, and that input will be used by the work group to be making decisions that will be coming to the board next month. I'm sorry, in March. It's not February yet.
Almost. Can I just ask, I think it's Barbara, Marty, Bill, and Tony, and Superintendent Stock, is there anything in our conversation that we've missed that stood out to you guys as we've gathered input? Any priorities, any things that you guys were surprised about that we haven't discussed?
I would just say the comment last night from a Rocklin High parent that when you ask the question about class size, because to try to get them to talk about what they voted for, they were happy to do that, but then questions about why did you do this? And a parent mentioned how important those foundational skills are at the elementary level, but as kids mature and get older and take on more of the responsibility of learning, they felt it was okay to increase that class size. And they also talked about the reason they come to Rocklin is for that well-rounded experience with our VAPA, with our athletics, and all the other things we provide. CTE, the parent mentioned. So that just stood out and makes sense to me, because it's so important for those foundational skills to be learned at the elementary level, and then we have to slow release of that responsibility.
I think my comment was, and I've only done the 2 elementary schools with Julie, I think we saw, and it was confirmed again last night, 2 nights ago, I can't remember, that we saw behavioral supports, though well-defined, behavior supports, social emotional supports, and like music and arts programs as intertwined, kind of as a support for students, as another outlet for social emotional pieces. So I think last night or the night before was behavioral supports, the night before, or the last one we did before that was social emotional supports, but yet they both saw them very similarly.
I think one thing that Rick already said well was, I think we encountered parents not understanding all the categories, and sometimes they'd vote, and then we'd go into detail about things like academic support, and they'd be like, oh, can I re-vote? And I'm like, sorry. So I think that's an important thing, and we did make an adjustment in our directions to do that, but it's hard, and it's hard with LCAP too, when we ask parents to engage, and then we give them all this language and background that's hard. So Hannah and I have had lots of conversations about how do we make this stuff more accessible and more user-friendly to these groups, or more specific to the groups, so that they can provide, real meaningful input.
I think especially things like this don't have to be the exception, they could be the rule, which is to say the best way to do is go test it with some parents before we send out the LCAP survey, see what they say, listen to how they respond, understand why, and then we can change going in. I think that's great. Appreciate it.
Yeah, along those same lines, there was a parent who, when we started talking about behavioral supports, said, okay, well, I've heard of PBIS, but is it really working? It was awesome. We had a principal that could say, yes, and here are some reasons why, and this is why we want to keep it and we want to spend money on it.
Yeah, and the principals, that's a great point. The principals are very helpful because many times they made it real for parents, like,
Yes.
academic support is walk to learn. Oh, yeah, we want that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
we have to remember there's local context.
Ellie.
I think it also was, there were some comments that I know we heard a little bit around. We want some immediate things that keep supporting. So things that have a lagging timeline to help, like professional learning materials, not as interested in as when our kids come fully back, we want them to have immediate access to help. So there was a sense of urgency around when we're all back, we want them to have the supports they need to deal with social emotional learning loss versus something that might be important, but you wouldn't get the impact immediately. And so that was very interesting around that. And then what I didn't hear, which was surprising, was anxiety around, will my kid get to college or the career? There seemed to be an assumption that largely they will, from the folks that attended, they will, where I have to think that maybe some of the people we didn't hear from, that maybe just they have the 2 or 3 jobs and it's harder to access, might have more anxiety around, will my kid get there without your help? Because I think we're so fortunate to have a community that is able to provide so much support for their children in so many ways, that they kind of have that assumption, like we talked about with safety, that, it's kind of taken care of. So I wonder about people that maybe have a different life experience and aren't able to do that, if they might have a different expectation or hope from their children from us than other parents. So that was just something that was interesting for me to kind of try to think through, how we look at all those different perspectives within our community.
Had the same thing, I was going to talk about the safety part. So we had the opportunity to speak with the kids at Whitney, the different ASB classes, and went through, and we asked, I guess they force rank them and they put their priorities in, and I asked, so these are up here, but safety is kind of middle or lower, and a handful of kids, it's just not a priority, we feel safe, and there was one kid that just recently moved in that said, the school I came from, it was really important. Here, I don't feel any problems over here. And then they talked about athletics and different stuff. So it was just, again, student perspective, but it was interesting to hear from a kid that said, the reason why I'm here is it's a safer place.
I do think though safety means different things to different kids.
Fair.
And to different parents. And so for some, safety means I don't want a gun on campus. For some, safety means I don't want to be bullied. And it's a very different perception. It's a very different way of and so because you feel safe and you're not going to be physically threatened from the outside doesn't mean that you feel safe in school. And so we have to make sure we tease that out. Because if you're getting bullied, you don't feel safe.
And Mr. Counter, the last thing I'll add is, and you probably all felt this too, is that there was we had smaller groups of people come to these, but there was a genuine sense of gratitude from everyone there about the fact that we came out, district leaders and board members, and sat with them and talked and listened. And a desire for us to do more of that. And as we think about kind of, enrollment and reconnecting with our community, not saying we all have a million nights to do this, but I think some form of this is pretty important. I think I heard that.
I'd also say that it reminds me, though, because it was obviously a self-selected group of people. We said we want to talk about budgets. They said, okay, I'll go do that. Obviously, that's a very special person that shows up and wants to do that. Within that context, even though they may not have known the buckets, the knowledge of how budgeting works, how our budget works, and the thoughtfulness that went into putting into how to think about our budget was really impressive. And I want these people to keep engaged and keep coming to our board meetings, and I hope we can, accomplish that.
And along those lines, thank you for all of you guys for the hours and hours and hours of work that you put into it to make it so easy for us as trustees to present and to gather the feedback. It really was awesome, and I feel like really worthwhile.
I would also think that, well, in person is great. I mean, you just can't replace it. I do think I wonder about keeping Zoom as one of the mechanisms, because for some folks, hey, between the crazy schedule of, my case, 4 kids and soccer and dinner and everything, to log in for an hour is much more accessible than get in the car, drive out. So I would wonder if we would, in our outreach going forward, have a hybrid model. I know that's a bad word, but an idea of in person because of that, but that we have an access that's through technology that does make it accessible for parents that just can't quite get there. Just like we stream board meetings, because we've said even in person when we're back, we still want that access for folks that can't come down, that we may just consider that is another avenue, not replacing the in-person.
Yeah, we had someone cooking dinner while they were talking to us, which was awesome, right? 'Cause I guarantee she wouldn't have been there if she couldn't have done that, right? So it was awesome.
I had piano music in the background. All 4 of my kids had piano lessons. Marty's like, okay, we're going to have a little journey in the background. Like,
Well, at least it was Journey.
yeah, at least it was journey. Yeah.
good.
But I love the opportunity for communication, and I would love the opportunity for it to be continued. As I was sitting there, I was thinking how great as we have new topics that come up, that this isn't just a budgetary meeting, but maybe we look at as a board, increased involvement in PTC meetings, whether it be, we each take a rotation or we take a turn. But I loved the opportunity, although I would have really appreciated in person. I think it was actually a really beautiful opportunity for us to be at school sites. And I loved being able to hear the parents brag on the teachers at Antelope Creek and brag on their principal at Rucola and really just share and say, hey, this is going really good. And now granted, they were coming from a standpoint, I'm sure, from budgetary, let me tell you what's important to me. But I actually really valued that two-way conversation between the parents. And I would love, even if I could just be a fly sitting on a wall, periodically, just to let our PTCs know or school site councils know, hey, we're here, we're around, we're listening. So I actually like the format that we look at maybe utilizing it for future decision-making opportunities too.
And I think the other, piece that we heard around the input, I think it was also critical that we were able to really make sure that everybody got touched. And I think that one piece is that refinement is what voices are we not hearing, and how do we think about hearing theirs as well. And I think that there may be areas like budget, which is an annual decision point for the board that's so critical, that we can look to refine, and that may be, okay, that's going to be a touchstone, and then there's other pieces. How do we look to involve and include in that? And I do want to compliment the board for, there's a lot of places that are saying, it's a pandemic, it's hard to do this, there's COVID restrictions, everybody's overwhelmed, and we'll try to get your input next year. Our board actually increased opportunities for input in the midst of a pandemic, so I just really think it's important for our community to understand the priority the 5 of you placed on this, to not let that be an excuse, but to push us into different ways of doing this. And I think that's, just really needs to be marked, because a lot of places just aren't doing this.
I think we had conversations.
I think we meant extra money for a special election because our president seems like he's about to go down.
Ugh.
You're
That'd
right
be
there?
great
You're right there,
if we
big guy?
can. If we can, no, I'm good.
Right.
I think I swallowed gum the wrong way. Anyway, had conversation with each of you and hoping that, as you're saying, whether I don't think it's a fixed, hey, you need to show up at this meeting at this day, but if we can have, either grab a school or get assigned to something to where, have somewhat a random, show up in the fall, show up in the spring, be kind of big ears and a small mouth and just answer any questions that come out, see what's going on. I think, as Roger said, we made a good effort getting out there. And again, thank you to the staff for making it happen, but kind of keeping engaging with that, right? I think, we all talked about improving the communication. I think that's one of those things to get out and be around different things. I think the PTC meetings are about our best option, unless you want to stand out in front of the elementary school every, Tuesday and smile and wave and answer questions. But I think the PTCs are probably the best angle for that. And then it just divide and conquer. I think we can kind of figure that out on our own, and we'll come up with a plan, hopefully.
Yeah, I do agree, and I think what I like about it is because, again, you hear folks that come to our board meeting, which is a self-selected set of group, and this widens that net a little bit. You're hearing from someone you might not hear otherwise. But I do think it's still a self-selected group. You're still getting people that are showing up to PTC, which is a special kind of group. So I do think, particularly for us, thinking about to Roger's point, who's not there, and that, I have not, even though I was at Rocklin, I didn't see any English language learner parents, participate. To the best of my knowledge, I have no idea, but if there were any Title I kids that were there, and I'm not sure. So the point being that there are groups that are most in need of our help, and most in need of our help, that we would need, that I'd want to make sure we're going out and we're making sure we're going to them and finding them to make sure their voice also at the table, where otherwise it wouldn't be. But I think it's a great idea.
With that, Barbara, can you put up our last slide? And again, the board can continue with, I wasn't sure if you were at a natural point where you wanted to continue, or I can frame kind of our next steps, so.
I want to make one more, go for it, and then I'll do it.
As we mentioned, we're continuing to get input. There's additional PTC meetings tomorrow night, Springview, Whitney, and Twin Oaks. Did I miss anybody? Okay, those are the three. We're going to be out with the Rocklin Victory and Thursday as well, and then we're going to be with the Rocklin High School leadership students tomorrow, and then the Victory students on Friday. And so that input's ongoing. Also, we're going to be sending out a link to our families, our students, staff. We'll open up a budget portal so that they can give additional comments as we go through the next several months of decisions by the board. And that link will be available to anyone, and our trustees will have direct access to see unfiltered the comments and thoughts that you all may have. And so we will continue to also monitor those state and federal funding developments. There's a lot of proposals, but not much meat on the bones, so we can actually understand what that means for us. And then we will continue to conduct outreach to increase enrollment. That's, as you know, a big effort, and our schools have been working diligently this month to contact every family that has not left us and so we'll continue to work on that because we know that's just really important. And then, of course, we will be providing to the board budget reduction and development recommendations to you. As you know, there's statutory requirements that have to be considered by the board. Some of those coming up as early as March. And it's unfortunate that the law is set up to do that, but it does, and then final decisions in May and June. So the board knows there will be an ongoing budget theme to decisions, and we invite our community to stay engaged with us. So
I'll repeat what Bill said in the conversation. I think it was with Sunset Ranch, but a few of the parents were asking, so other than our feedback, what can we do to help you guys? They were offering their suggestions. You tweak this, financial wise, and Bill was quick to say, the best thing you can do is reach out to your friends in the community, and those people that have left, if you can reach out and bring them back in, again, enrollment helps us out. So definitely on that. And then I know in one of the analysis had staff, and I know we've done the LCAPs, we've done these things with the PTCs, we've done them with the students. The reach out to the teachers, to those folks, I guess when we send that email out, they'll have access to providing that feedback also, correct?
Exactly, and students, because we've heard at our last board meeting, so we promised that using the Gmail, our students would also have access as well, so.
Could you speak to the portal that we'll be providing as well?
Yeah, we did this actually last year, is what we did is we set up through our website, and then we'll email the link. So it allows our stakeholders to provide input to the board and district leaders around their thoughts around the budget, because we'll be begin making recommendations to the board next month. We'll be requesting board action in March. So it's an opportunity as those things become presented to the board, that beyond the board meetings, there's an open access for people to share their thoughts and around that. And so in order to try to increase that input mechanism, we thought one of the best ways was to create that people could, go to it, add to it, and then it gives you trustees, again, unfiltered comments from the community. And that's something that I left open really throughout the whole process last year. Our intention is to open that up in the next week or two, and then have that stay open until the board finishes its decisions in June. And that was quite popular last year. I think there were hundreds and hundreds of comments that were received. And so, we anticipate that there will be, again, a lot of commentary from our community, which is very helpful.
Before we wrap up, I had an idea I wanted to throw out there while we're all together. And feel free to chew it apart and tell me that it won't work. But our community has been vocal about a lot of these areas, and has said, hey, we want to help. Some organizations have reached out to me saying, hey, how can we help? I know it may not necessarily help for balancing long-term budgets, but I had a thought of if we were able to gather a document of large one-time expenditures. I'm thinking tracks, fields, large projects, that if we were able to set up possibly through our foundation, a matching program where maybe there's organizations in the community that say, hey, I would love to take that project for our USD. We want our students in school. We want to prioritize safety on campus. We want to prioritize teacher support. We want to prioritize student learning. We want to prioritize social emotional health. So if that's the case, some of these organizations have said, is there a project that's $100,000, $200,000 that we could take for you to help you not have to make too many budget reductions in those areas? Have we done something like that before? Are we open to that idea?
Barbara, what restrictions do we have on receiving money from organizations?
We can receive donations either through REEF or directly to the school district. We have had donations. The one that comes to mind was the signage at the Rocklin High School football field. We got a large donation a few years ago. Some of the items that you mentioned, if we don't have them planned for or funded through our routine restricted maintenance account, which is restricted, I guess that would be the qualifier. Is it would have, for it to help us with our operational, it would have to be something that we weren't spending with restricted dollars, because we wouldn't be able to move the restricted dollars unrestricted. But we could definitely look at that and try to come up with a list of what that could possibly be.
Find 10 organizations. It's a great way to bring the community together, even have a couple serve days, project days, volunteers, families together. Just trying to get as creative as possible to maybe help free up some funds. Looking at that one slide you gave us, I'm torn. The one of, let's see, slide 9, where it's, okay, you make $1 million cut in 1 year, or budget reduction in 1 year. It's a $3 million savings over the course of 3 years. Do you wait? But then you're making a much larger budget reduction in the outlying years. And so I'm just trying to look at if we can free up some funds to get us through these 3 years. Potential thought if we're open to it as a board. I'd love to gather more information from our community on that if you're open to it.
I'm definitely open to it. I think it sounds like a fantastic idea.
And then the other piece is that I just was, because we'll get a lot of feedback on, well, if you did these things to like save money, you could then do this until we can realize the savings, we can't book it in the budget. So it's like there's the piece of a pledge versus you've submitted the check. So the other piece is for us to include in our budget development process would be, there's a timing piece and then the checks received. And so there are some, definitely this is an opportunity for us to either look at how do we accelerate or enhance or look at some other pieces that are there or desires that are there, but we just don't have funding for. So those would be things I think very exciting to possibly look at as well. Anything that commits in a salary of an employee, we would have to look at a little bit differently just because of those issues. But absolutely, we have more needs than we have funds, so anything people want to do, we are happy to work with them on.
Could I get a list of items that are maybe large expenditure items or would make sense in like a project? I'm thinking, so I can actually have maybe a sheet of a few that would actually allow us to free up funds to help earmark them towards other areas.
So you're thinking more of projects, not like we would like to fund the music program, or we would like to fund an art docent program, or you're talking more of the facilities is what I'm hearing.
The reason I'm thinking a project would be, I hesitate, some of those, if they make the one-time money purchase, because I don't want to take one of our substantial, I don't want to, one of our substantial, I mean, everything's important, but meaning if it were to be a program that was funded, my concern would be after that gift has been given in the outlying years, that's a concern. Now, that's something we could look at, but I would hate to then see that program be in jeopardy later once we don't, do you see what I'm saying, in 3 years? So more thinking if there was projects that over the next 3 years were maybe one-time expenditures.
Like I can think of, there's some things like that naturally fall there. Some of the technology pieces that you heard about, the facility, and those do free up general fund dollars. That's an exact area, and we can get a list and what those are. Sometimes people don't think about like, oh, I want to fund wireless switches, but that's in a very acute need of like $500,000. And not to make a commercial, but the facility piece, like we're going to need a new field at Rocklin High School. Very big secret I know in the Rocklin High community soon. Well, that's over $1 million, $1.5 million, expenditure. The board's put aside some dollars for it, but it's not fully realized. So there are some of those that are huge, that are important, but we wouldn't move money out of the general fund to help that. So we can come up with a combination of all of those, because frankly, our maintenance budget has been cut by nearly $1 million a year because of the budget reduction. So we will absolutely work to come up with a list. I know that Trustee Price and I were meeting with the Reef Board just yesterday or Tuesday, and they've asked for some similar areas of need. So we have more need than there is money, so we are happy to provide that, and then we'll work to share that with you all, and then if there's other thoughts you have, let us know, and if our areas aren't in areas of interest people have, let us know. We'll see if we can expand in that as well, because it may just be something that wasn't our top, but somebody's passionate about an area, and we're happy to work with them.
I think it's a really valid point, and I want to share a really specific example. So when I was parent club president and at the back to school night, Mr. Stewart gave the video. He and I were tag teaming the video, and he's like down in the hole, remember? Like literally, here I am. This is some of our needs, and it was really good. It was really specific. Well, later on that day, I had a phone call from a business. I'll totally give them a shout out, Sun Park Dental in Rocklin, and they said, could we meet with you? We'd have some money we'd like to give to Parent Club. So we met later that week, and I had quite the presentation prepared, and I had a couple specifics, and I started in, and I was on number 3, and they said, that's the one. And they said, we want to buy 10 outside tables. Here's $10,000. And they handed me a check right then and there. And so a lot of times, if we share our specific needs, we're not just saying, hey, we need money, right? Come help us out. We literally are saying, hey, here's some specifics. We do have generous people. We do have generous businesses that are willing to help us. And like Superintendent Stock said, this has been on my radar for the last 2 days because we are working on a list And I'm part of the subcommittee on REEF to make those choices. And so it'll be really helpful. We're waiting to get that from them so that we can make some decisions and see how the foundation can help as well. So, good points.
So just as we wrap, I do want to say, so as we move from this conversation around, community input how to the harder conversation of where the actual cuts are going to get made. I think this really helps prioritize. Actually, we've learned a lot through this process. It's been great. But ultimately, once we prioritize, that we get to the point where we're going to have to make hard decisions between things. And I appreciate I've said this before. I want to say it again to the extent as we get into those, this year ideally, certainly next year, because the reality is if you think about a $6 million problem we're going to have to fix, it's not going to get fixed this year. We're going to have to do this for the next several years. And when we're making these hard decisions, just like parents who don't understand, I may understand the words of what the budget item, I don't understand the effectiveness of the budget item. So I'm almost shooting in the dark as much as they are. And we just, as a board member, say, yeah, I think probably professional development matters. It makes sense to me. Probably makes sense that class size is high. But I have no data behind me so to the extent that we can start thinking, and again, because we probably have a 2, 3, 4 year process we're going to be going through to do this, start thinking around how we can think of tying these programs to effectiveness data so we can better understand. It's probably worth us having a conversation of what our goals are. But to the extent that we have shared goals around college and career readiness and graduation, and that's what we want out of a graduate, what does it take? And then where are these investments going to get us along that lines? And so understanding where our dollars are best spent is something that I'd love to sort of see if we could push a little more towards as we also flesh out this information.
And just to pivot, I know that the board has set for me goals of working to improve our outcomes in mathematics for students, and also for looking at how we create more signature type programs like in dual immersion specifically. So I know, for example, the board setting those goals for me as superintendent, is helped me think about what are those recommendations, what are those pieces tied to specific areas. And so, that type of clarity is very helpful from the board around how do we tie what we're looking towards to what the budget looks like. Because I think the goal I hear of the board is we want to plan a budget, in a sense to achieve our goals, not have a budget and then try to figure out what we want to do. And I think that's the appropriate approach.
And to the extent that we can look at program effectiveness, right? So I look at opportunities for credit recovery. Do they? Of the percentage of kids that go to summer school, do they recover? Do they end up graduating? Have we not been able to show it works? If it does, let's put more money. If it doesn't, let's think differently. So how do we know whether or not, when you ask me to cut this, whether or not it's effective or not is what I really want to know.
And then did you want a specific answer on the summer school? Because
No.
Okay. They got paused.
Because I want a specific answer on everything, right? So
Right.
I mean, truly, everything as we start to think about what makes sense, that's what we're looking for, right?
Is now the time to set those goals? Will we have another opportunity? I'm just thinking, I know for me, being new to this table, I come going, man, when tough decisions are made, I lean towards our LCAP. I lean towards the goals we have listed on our LCAP, that our district will be about ensuring students achieve and make continuous progress, that we provide support systems, safe schools, we ensure staff continually build capacity. So when those tough decisions come, it's helpful for me to know what are our goals here? Would you agree as colleagues those are similar goals, or are there other things that I need to be thinking about the next few months as we head into this process together?
Where did those LCAP goals come from? Did they come from our strategic plan?
They are linked to our strategic plan, and then this is the first year of a 3-year LCAP. Previously, they've been annual LCAPs and so we brought those to the board, but there is an alignment to our strategic plan. They also are reviewed and commented on and suggested by, we have a parent community engagement group committee that works and a staff committee that works. And so then those go to the board. So those are not things that just staff did in isolation and they're put there. And then beyond those two areas is then that's where in sense of the mathematics goal the board set, kind of in a specific within that academic piece. And as we had that conversation, I shared that that's a multi-year goal. I mean, that's not a light switch goal. That's something that we have to first understand, why are we getting the results we are? What impacts do we want to have? Where do we go? And then using that improvement science, as President Counter mentioned, small change pieces to see what works, what doesn't, before you look to do some scaling. So that frankly, is multiple years to move the whole system towards that goal. Doesn't mean we don't do other things, but there is, with limited resources to have impact, we have to kind of target, and so I know that the board's important that kids learn to read and write, but the biggest focus of that improvement is in the mathematics pieces. So those are ones, the dual immersion program, for example, of creating another kind of signature program, the competitiveness, that's a very important goal, but it also does have a budget implication as well. I mean, so to really have a quality program, there are some additional costs. So while the board can set additional goals, if it isn't have a focus, then it can tend to be, it's very slower at implementation. The resources may not be there to be impactful. And then we also, the board was, I think, very wise in saying, we don't want to have it be, well, what's the flavor this year? Yeah. We really want to have a consistent focus that really allows us to show improvement. Doesn't mean we won't be responsive to changing needs and things, but that's at least, I'll just share with you my perspective on where that came from. We are due to update our strategic plan. And so in the next year or so, that there is an opportunity to reconvene a committee to do that work. But, so that would be another kind of overall opportunity as well.
Another way to, I'm sorry, Hannah, did you want to, another way to think about that is there's a thing that kind of it's popular across the state, a lot of districts are doing it, and I thought about it, and I personally was thinking, we're just so busy right now, there's just so much going on, it's hard to take on something else. But this notion of a graduate profile, with community involvement, sort of a community understanding of what is a high quality graduate of Rocklin look like? What does that actually mean? And then there's templates for how you go through this process where you get to, when you say you want a well-rounded, what does that literally mean? And so then you define what a high quality graduate looks like, and then you can start back mapping, saying, okay, if that's what we want, what budget do we need? What programs do we need? What emphasis? And we have to make cuts. We say, what's their best likely of getting to where we've agreed that's where we want to go? And then you still can you still have goals within that, but it's still around, you're clear on the same North Star. And there's some advantages to that. So I'm happy to share some examples around the state that we can look at.
Yeah, that'd be great, because then you can do that gap analysis, and then you can look at certain students may have a larger gap in certain areas, so how do we close that gap? Others may not, and so there is, and then you backwards map, I think, like all the way back down to elementary, early childhood.
And it is a nice way to involve the community in a let's not talk about what we're going to cut. Let's talk about, again, the asset. What do we want? Like, what do we agree makes? Yeah.
So what's the best forum for that? Because I would really appreciate that. I think that would help us to know what is it we're working towards.
I don't want to speak for Roger.
What I would share is, I mean, one, I want to study a little bit more. Then I'll have to be very candid with the board. We could then, I'd have to really do some work with colleagues in cabinet to give a kind of a recommendation of this is what it would take to do that quality, because we frankly have really made deep cuts to, it's appropriate to keep cuts as far away from the classroom to the district office and administration, that like we're one of like 21 out of 22 local districts in the amount of dollars spent on them. So the capacity to do all these things has really shrunk. So being strategic and focused is critical to achieving. So I'd want it to be very candid to come back to the board and say, if we were to undertake this, we can, but this may be something else we're going to defer to do that, because to do the experience that Trustee Miller talked about really is a lot of meetings, stakeholder, you're really going out and you're starting with what do you aspire for your children to be, then what makes that up? What are the gaps? So it's a great type of process, but it's really, 6 months to a year to really go through that in detail, because a high school parent has different than elementary, because, they can see my kid's out in 2 years, where every kindergarten kid is going to Harvard or Stanford. We all know that, right? So, so that's where I'd really want to be honest with the board around the capacity to do that, and have an understanding, is that the priority now versus something else? And that's just being candid. I'd rather not overpromise and underdeliver for you. But we can research that and get back to something with that.
Just going off a little bit, the, knowing that we're going to have to go into hard decisions and looking at making cuts, I'll ask you, I'm assuming that the groups, the departments, the staff, all the people on the internal side, we've found everything, everyone's offered up all the cuts that they could, right? There's nothing sitting out there, no one said, hey, we haven't asked that group, or we haven't asked that department, or we haven't found, like we've cut all that stuff at this point, correct? It's been removed, I guess. That's already accounted for, I guess. That's where I'm going.
We have made reductions, the board has made reductions over the last few years, where I would say all of the low-hanging fruit has been picked. And so if there is something that someone has thought of that we haven't, I mean, we've gone through all of our prior year's list, the 2 and 3 years list that we have not addressed, to review what is available and what to reduce. So I believe the answer to that is yes.
And we've also, we've asked our district leadership team to, earlier in the year to give us, thoughts they had as well. But if you look at the earlier slide, the board has made, nearly 17 million in reductions. I mean, you start to look at this, for a budget our size, that's a significant amount. And so, the board rightly so has avoided things in the classroom, and the list actually gets smaller, not larger. Every year we make more reductions. And so we definitely have asked district leadership team, we'll be doing that again at the end of the week to make sure, that's principals and everyone, is there anything we've missed? And of course, our community has weighed in, and they'll continue to get to that online portal. But we've been working as a cabinet on this, kind of coming up with options since really October. So, because we knew this was coming, so we began starting to cost out the transportation, doing other things over the last several months to really see what could be on a list of recommendations and what really isn't viable.
Take a quick look around the room, and I'll defer to public comment, but any more conversation, communication, I'll open it up to public comment or written comment, but I'm doing that. So are there any verbal Zoom or public comments or written comments?
There are no public comments at this time, President Counter.
Okay, that makes it a little easier. And then I think next, it's kind of funny, we're going to go to public comment again. So the next item up on the agenda is we'll adjourn to a closed session. But before I go to that closed session, I'll ask again, Ryan, sorry, are there any public comments regarding any closed session items?
There are no public comments for closed session.
All right. So on that, the board will now adjourn to a closed session regarding the items listed on the agenda. And that's it. Looking for Rick to close his computer.
Yeah.